Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this regular meeting on June 23rd of Lunenburg Town Council. Before we begin the regular business on our agenda, I need to acknowledge an absence around the screen and at our council table. And with utmost respect, I want to acknowledge the absence of a member of our council team. Councillor Joseph Carnevale passed away on Wednesday, June 17th, after a courageous battle with cancer. And those of us here all witnessed firsthand the valiant fight he put forth. I never once heard him complain. He attempted valiantly to fulfill his duties as a councillor throughout his illness and never stopped working to support and protect the ones he loved. Joseph Carnevale immigrated to Canada with his parents and siblings and grew up in Toronto. He moved to Lunenburg with his own family in 2006. Councillor Carnevale was elected in 2016 and was extremely proud to serve his chosen hometown as a member of the Lunenburg Town Council. He was a champion of the most vulnerable among us and spoke up whenever he felt he could make a difference. He was a kind and gentle man, and that made him truly a pleasure to work with. Our sympathies extended to his family and friends, and as a community, we grieve this loss. Please observe with me a moment of silence in honor of Councillor Joseph Carnevale. Thank you. Joseph certainly made a lasting impression, and his memory will live on for many, many years in this community. So we do need to get on with the business on our agenda. And so the first order of business is an approval of that agenda. So I would look to members of council for a motion to approve the agenda for today. Deputy Mayor McGee, seconded by Councillor Mosier, for the approval of the agenda. All in favor? Or Councillor Croft, did you have a comment before we go to a vote?
Yes, thank you, Worship. I was wondering if we could add an item on there, and that is possible meeting back at our council chambers with the new rules that have put in place. We have a little discussion around that.
Okay, well, I would look to members of council if there's time. I would suggest, given that we have bolded items of priority and other items already on the agenda, we could add a discussion around our reconvening in person. And if not, then we could add that to a future discussion or certainly take the discussion offline. Councillor Risser?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just on a point of information, we were ordered not to meet in person by ministerial directive. Has that directive been rescinded? Because I don't think it makes much sense to discuss it until that's rescinded.
That is a very valid point. We did mention that on Friday when we had our informal discussions that we are meeting remotely as directed by the minister through a special order. So we wouldn't be able to unilaterally change that and meet again at this point in time. I'm not, I know there's the question's been asked as to when that may be lifted, but I don't know that we have an answer to that question.
Your worship, I'll just withdraw that then and wait till we get authorization to meet again in person.
Okay. So having with that determined then, ready for the vote on the agenda. All in favor? Any opposed? There is none, so motion is carried. And then we will move right into a motion to approve our meeting minutes of June 9th and June 16th, please. Moved by Councillor Mosier, seconded by Councillor Croft. Any errors, omissions, comments with regard to those meeting minutes? Seeing nothing indicated. All in favor of the approval of those minutes? No one is left to oppose, so the motion is carried and the minutes are approved. Next on our agenda, we have standing public hearings and presentations, and there are none scheduled for today. Under correspondence, we do have a significant piece of correspondence, which is actually bolded for our attention with from Housing Nova Scotia. Notice of the payment due from 2019-20 of $15,700, and with a projected contribution expected in a range between $37,728 and $41,595. And we had anticipating an increase, had actually, as our capable finance team have tried to accommodate for what they anticipate happening. We approved an amount of $22,000 in our budget, and certainly the amount suggested is far exceeding the amount we have budgeted for in our current budget. And this was discussed among mayors and CAOs and other folks with the NSFM call last week. Most municipal units, from the discussion, it appeared that many municipal units received a very similar letter, and no one was very happy about it. So it seems like there's an incredible and really gobsmacking lack of appreciation for their partners in this effort to provide housing, and a lack of understanding and appreciation and consideration for how we function and how we need to budget from year to year. So I'd open it up for other comments, and there was a suggestion of a letter being penned to note our concern. Anyone wish to comment further? Yes, Councillor Croft and then Councillor Bachman.
Thank you, Worship. I would agree we should write that letter. I would also think we should copy in any other appropriate people like our employee and whoever might be appropriate to get a copy of that letter as well. So if you need a motion, I will make a motion that we send the letter.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Croft, and seconded by Councillor Visser, I believe. Thank you. Yes, Councillor Bachman.
Agreed with colleagues that definitely the letter needs to be written, but did they give any indication of why such a large increase, or they just basically said, this is it, you're gonna pay, or?
Mention of age of the housing, I believe, and just, I guess, greater need of repair. Not sure how they planned for this, but certainly we did, and staff may recall, and other members of council who've served for multiple terms, that we had run into this in a previous time and attempted to, and had presentations by members of the Western Region Housing Authority come speak to us and pleaded for, again, consideration of our budgeting process and how we need to operate. And that seemed to have, or we hadn't experienced this kind of radical disregard for that until, again, recently. So I don't know if it's change in personnel or something, but it's not been entrenched in their practice to give us proper notice. And I think they referred to, giving us notice the way they did with the, telling us it's going to be a lot more next year, but that certainly doesn't account for the timing and an appreciation of what our budget years are, and when we need to approve budgets, and proper consideration for notice to us. Yes, Councillor, sorry, Deputy Mayor.
Just a information question. Their letter states the municipal contribution includes property taxes. So if Lisa's on here, do we know what the property taxes are for, just out of interest, what the property taxes are for that housing?
Yes, I am here, Deputy Mayor, but unfortunately I don't have that number with me.
Okay, just curiosity. Thank you.
And maybe I could just comment, because someone said had we received any advance notice, and this is the only notice that we did receive from them. And it is certainly unfortunate timing in the budget cycle for sure. It needs to be about 5 months earlier at the very least.
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Dagley. Yes, Councillor Croft.
Well, maybe, Your Worship, we should send them the 22,000 along with our letter and tell them that next year we need appropriate notice prior to budgets being set. So maybe they'll send a message that way as well.
Well, I do think, some sort of correction is needed in how this functions. It's kind of a perennial problem in the communication flow between various provincial departments and the municipalities that share some of the responsibilities with them for financing some services. And this is just a blatant example of how it can go wrong from time to time. So I certainly think we should partner with our other municipal units in the province. And, Councillor Croft, you mentioned copying other people. Well, certainly we would copy our NSFM, and I'm sure they will be representing us in greater number in, giving province notice of our concerns around this. So do we need to, there is a motion, and may I ask, I'm not sure how clear we were about the wording of the motion and whether we want a letter written. I'm not sure if staff need further clarification, or if perhaps we could hear back how staff may have captured our sentiments on this.
Yes, Your Worship. Moved by Councillor Croft, seconded by Councillor Risser, to write a letter of concern to Housing Nova Scotia regarding their increased 2021 budget projection shortfalls municipalities are expected to pay. This letter is to be copied to the NSFM, MLA, etc.
And I just note that the timing is the increase is significant, which is concerning in and of itself, to have such a drastic increase, but the timing is also pretty key. So as long as
yes, Your Worship, I'll add that
captured in the end result, that would be great. Any other discussion or comment? Are we okay to move ahead with a vote on that motion? Okay, all in favor? And all are in favor, so the motion is carried. And a letter will be written. Thank you very much. Next on our agenda is committee meeting minutes and recommendations, and they're just one group recognized there, or information from the Waste Reduction Strategy Working Group. And there were meeting notes from the meetings held on March 5th, just prior to sort of when everything changed in our world, and May 14th, which was the first meeting the group was able to have after our operating procedures and processes changed. So that those notes are provided for council's information and for public disclosure of the information of the work that's been done. As chair of that group, I just want to further comment that the group met on two other occasions, and they do have a report in the works and pretty much ready for presentation to council. Just wasn't quite wasn't quite enough time to pull it all together for the meeting today. So it will come forward to our next full public meeting, which we expect to be the end of July. But I did want to make mention of the fact that there are recommendations coming from that group that some are short term and some are longer term and so on. It is part of a total strategy that we're hopeful that the council will adopt, if not in whole, at least in part, and hopefully in whole. And one of those recommendations is around signage for the election. I know we've discussed that before, and I'm not asking for council to discuss without the information before them, but given the time span prior to the election, I thought it was important to make mention of it again. How council chooses to deal with that is, will be a point of discussion when it comes before us to be considered more fully. But it's certainly the intention of the group to carry that recommendation forward. And I'm not sure if there were, and I looked to Heather, if there's anything else of a more timely matter that should be brought, maybe top of mind to you, Ms. McCallum, or otherwise we'll just await the full report.
Thank you, Your Worship. There was one other item about a small revision to the solid waste management bylaw that's currently before the General Government Committee, but Ms. Renton assures me that that has actually already been incorporated. So
Great.
Nothing else time sensitive.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, so the group was mindful of things happening and the timing of things, but it's sometimes with the challenges we were faced with, it was difficult to wrap things up. As you recall, we had hoped to have a report from this group by the end of March, and that certainly was the target until, everything sort of went a little sideways. So I'm very proud of the work. The group worked very well together, and I think you'll be happy with the report and see merit in it. So moving on then to item 6, unfinished business. Under corporate services, we have some important work to tend to with respect to conducting elections this fall. And so Councillor Risser, I believe, has a motion to rescind to put forth, and a follow-up one as well.
Yeah, I thought I gave notice of this, so moved.
So he's moving, and I assume at this point we need a seconder for the motion to rescind Council's October 22nd, 2019 motion authorizing a paper-only election ballot system. Is there a seconder for the motion to rescind? Councillor Bachmann? All in favor?
If I may, Your Worship, just a
Yes,
quick
sorry.
question. I'm fine with the motion, but I just have a quick question to Pat. Pat, we discussed security the last time, and you discussed sort of false data entry, but I'm wondering if you can tell me how the system has bolstered itself against hacking. Your mic's not on, Pat.
Sorry, Your Worship. I must confess, Councillor Risser, that I don't have any additional information for you. This is essentially totally based on the goodwill of individuals that they will only vote the pin that is assigned to them. There is some internal controls that ensure that if you start getting a flood of votes from one IP address, that apparently triggers a flag in the system. In fact, I was speaking with the returning officer in Truro last week, and I think when they have a poll, for example, in the nursing home, where you're going to be getting all of the residents that can vote using one iPad, they have to sort of advise the IntelliVote so it won't trigger this issue. Other than that, I'm not sure of the internal controls to prevent hacking.
Thanks.
Sorry, and I was jumping the gun with the call to the vote. Are there other questions or comments with discussion around this motion to rescind? No, if there are none, all in favor? And unanimously approved, so that motion is carried. And then moving into first reading of the adoption of the alternative voting bylaw.
And Your Worship, I have prepared the draft resolution, which gives first reading of the bylaw that's attached, and it did have a couple of minor word changes, and the direction to advertise at least 14 days before, and also providing that the second and final reading will be at the Zoom council meeting on July 28th at 2.
Okay. So yes, Councillor Risser.
I'll move.
So leaving first reading of the adoption of the new bylaw. Is there a seconder for that? The Deputy Mayor seconds. Thank you. Questions? Yes, Councillor Bachman.
Only question I have is, if our next meeting is July the 28th, is it necessary to say at the Zoom meeting, just in case we wouldn't be meeting via Zoom by then?
That's a fair comment, Your Worship. I suppose with the consent of the mover and seconder, that word Zoom could be deleted.
I think everyone's okay with that, just for safety's sake. I have a couple of questions on the language in the proposed bylaw as well.
Yes.
Mr. Burke. I'm in reading it, I was really concerned that portions of it were really difficult to understand because there are multiple references to the Elections Act. And without those portions of the Elections Act embedded in the bylaw, you really weren't sure what they were talking about. So I referenced 7B, 7A1, 7A2, 7B3 as examples where there were references to components of the Elections Act. And I wonder if either they could be, simply those portions included in the bylaw, or um,
Um,
some reference to or some description of what they were referring to.
Your worship, ordinarily when you're drafting this nature, and I looked in particular at the Halifax bylaw and the Truro bylaw, and most of the other electronic voting bylaws that I have looked at around the province have very similar wording and do not incorporate those materials in the bylaw itself. And one has to be careful, because if you just sort of try to generally summarize what the effect of, for example, in 7A1, what the effect of section 33 and 38 are without fully capturing all of the aspects of the section, you may be inadvertently reducing the effect of this section 7A1. Certainly, if you would like, we could, with the next council materials on the agenda package, include a copy of the act, which would allow people to look at those sections.
Even just those sections.
Okay.
As appendices, which, might make it, quicker to reference and easier to make sense of.
That would be fine, Your Worship.
Thank you. I'd appreciate that. And there was one other, I was also confused a bit and concerned and about the differentiation and the references to advanced polling days and alternative polling days. And I know what an advanced polling day is on a regular kind of election. But when we're talking about electronic voting, from what I understand that's happened in other municipalities, once you have that advanced or alternative voting day, I'm not sure if they're interchangeable or one depends. And so perhaps you can explain, and they kind of just extend. So it starts here and it ends on the ordinary polling day, and there isn't sort of a designated time within that, unless you're talking about an opportunity for people to come to a specific polling site to do the electronic voting, which probably is what's being referred to, but I found it a little confusing.
Yes, and it is a confusing concept, and I'm not sure any court, Your Worship, has actually interpreted this, but the Act requires you to have advanced polling days, which is the first day that you must have it is the Tuesday before ordinary polling day, and it can either be the Thursday or Saturday before, and we likely will choose the Saturday before, and then have the alternative voting days are the dates when you can vote by the alternative voting method. Once we pass this bylaw, if we agree to go all electronic, which seems to make sense given the pandemic and the possible second wave, then we would likely start it on Saturday the 9th and continue right through to the end of polling day. You can have it 24/7, but in section 7B1, we've provided that there will be a polling station. So that will allow, whether we set it up in the town office or at the community center or whatever, so that people can come there and get assistance on those dates. So on each advanced polling day and on ordinary polling day, we would have a polling station that they could go and vote. I agree that there could be better wording, but I think this is the wording that's used by all of the alternative voting bylaws across the province.
Okay, thanks. Thank you for the clarification. And yeah, it's just a bit of a transition to wrap your head around around it, being really familiar with the old way of doing things. So,
And your worship, the way the bylaw is drafted, it gives us the option to go all electronic, but it's not required. You could theoretically have paper balloting on polling day and electronic on advanced polling day. Just because of the pandemic, that's not likely the way we're going to go. But the bylaw does give you some flexibility.
great, thank you. Makes it, I guess, longer standing or, yeah, more
Yes.
the flexibility is great. Good. Thank you. Are there any other questions on this? Everyone's fine with the motion to have first reading, all in favor? And there is no one left to oppose, so the motion is carried, and we have then had first reading of this, and we'll look to Mr. Burke to appropriately follow up.
Yes, your worship, we will advertise in the newspaper for the second reading, which will take place on July 28th.
Great, thank you.
And I think that's my only matter, so I will step out, your worship.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And so next, under corporate services is the Lunenburg Academy School Bell Handrail and Signage Project Proposal. And this is Mr. McDonald's report for us. And I know he's with us. So Mr. McDonald, would you like to introduce the subject matter and highlight the report for us?
Thank you, your worship. Basically, their staff is looking towards having 2 motions being approved by council this afternoon. The first motion of council would be to approve the removal of the Lunenburg Academy bell with the financial support of the Lunenburg Academy Foundation for storage until it can be refurbished and installed on the academy grounds. And the second motion pursuant to the report is authorization to give to staff to write a letter of request to the Lunenburg Academy Foundation seeking additional financial support for the Lunenburg Academy lot development plan, the bell monument, the wall sign, and the south entrance handrails as set out in the funding table below in the report. So we're looking for council's direction as to whether or not they approve the idea of removing the bell from the bell tower and placing it in the lot development plan or the plaza, proposed plaza of the lot development plan in front of the academy, and a letter seeking financial support for the Lunenburg Foundation, Academy Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So there are a couple of recommendations and accompanying wording provided for our consideration. So I'd turn it over to members of council to deal with them accordingly, or offer questions of Mr. Burke, of Mr. McDonald. Yes, I saw Councillor Mosier and Councillor Risser. Councillor Mosier, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, your worship. I'm okay with the first recommendation, although within the wording, it says the financial help, where I think it should be like the sole financial responsibility of the foundation to bear the costs. Because I don't want to get in a situation where, you know, we take the bell out and then all of a sudden we're into another $50,000 worth of repairs there that, you know, as a result of removing it. And then we're on the hook for that because we really have a tight budget on this.
If I may, your worship, I'll be pleased with that amendment to that motion if council wishes to add that. I receive assurances from Alan Richards that the foundation did talk about the concept of removing the bell and creating a place for it in the plaza, and for their alumni to be able to raise funds for plaques of their donations along the monument for the bell. So I'm happy with that amendment. If there's any concerns with regards to additional costs, that would be fine.
Okay, it does indicate in the chart that there's zero contribution from the town for that. Is that, or is that something separate?
No, you're correct. That is our intention, that there'll be no costs associated with the Bell Monument as outlined in the table.
Thank you. Okay. Councillor Risser?
Thank you, Worship. I'd certainly echo Councillor Moser's points. One further question, Arthur. Is this purely aesthetic or is the bell a structural problem?
The bell is not really a structural problem where it is located now. It's really not properly operable at its location. We did have a rope or string tied to the bell that was connected in the hallway to lamp, but a persistent leak going down that rope was causing damage to the actual roof structure and the ceiling of lamp. So it could stay where it is structurally, but if you really want to expose it and have it showcased as a monument, as a testament to the bell that once occurred there, very similar to the St. John's Anglican Church, people will get to appreciate the bell a lot better. You can't really see the bell from ground level, or when you're up in lamp even, you have to actually go up on top of the roof to actually see it. So the foundation thought it'd be a great idea to showcase the bell and allow people to actually walk up and appreciate the bell.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Bachman and then Deputy Mayor.
Sitting on the Academy Foundation Board as the town's representative and being part of the earlier discussions, the biggest thing that the foundation is looking to do right now is, with the town's assistance, to have the bell removed from its location now and stored for future consideration. And that's it to this point. Basically, with the scaffolding and the opportunity to have the thing removed right now is the most opportune time. And then to have the bell stored over in the blue building as a location until the foundation actually came up with a final plan of what they would like to do with it and how they would like to either have it restored and then displayed. So right now, the thought was perfect timing to have it removed and stored and do nothing else with it until further monies and options have been explored.
Thank you. Yeah, the timing is certainly the opportunity. The scaffolding is there, the workforce is in place, so the cost is minimal to do that at this point in time, and it would be much more expensive to try to do that sole piece of work at another time. Deputy Mayor?
Your Worship, this question may be premature based on Councillor Bachman's thinking that the second part of this is not up for discussion at the moment, but I think back to that bell that's down by the waterfront and how annoying that can be when the kids start to ring it. And so I'm hoping I think it's a great idea, but I'm hoping that when the bell monument is in place, it's not ringable. And I think that would be very distractive to lamp and to walking tours and so on that might be in the area. So hopefully if the gong is in the bell, that it's welded shut so that people can't ring the bell. So, but that we can discuss later.
Okay. Councillor Risser?
Thank you, Worship. Just another question that came to mind over the course of the discussion. Arthur, so the motion as it's constructed now would have the Academy Foundation bearing the full cost of the removal of the bell and bringing it down. And I appreciate the mayor's comments that it's an opportune time to do that with all the scaffolding up. Do we envision any resulting repairs that would be necessary because of moving the bell? Like if we do, I'd like to have those in the motion too. If not, then it's a moot point.
As outlined in the report, there's a proposed budget of $20,000, and that will cover the refurbishment of the actual bell, as well as the design and fabrication of the monument in which the bell will sit on. So That is the estimated costs for doing that, and I shared those costs with both Scott and Alan of the foundation.
I appreciate that. I'm more referring to any new work that might be necessary where the bell used to be in the bell tower as a result of removing the bell.
Is there potential damage to the building?
It might be damage, it might be exposure of something that wasn't exposed. I don't know, that's why I asked, but I'm just saying it might be prudent to think of the full cost.
Right, to be honest, we haven't anticipated any additional costs with regards to the actual bell tower itself. They're restoring the bell tower as we speak, and a lot of good work has been done, particularly to the roof and of the tower. So I don't anticipate any major problems, but I'll keep an eye on that. If there are any issues, I'll bring that back forward to council for their consideration.
Okay. Were there any further questions on the motion? And do we have has it been moved? No, it's just been discussed. So is there someone willing to move that? Yes, Councillor Bachman, moving the motion as recommended. Is there a seconder for that? Deputy Mayor and Councillor Mosher, did you wish to speak further to it, or you were just looking to second? Yeah, hands both went up at the same time. So is there any further discussion then? All right, ready for the question. All in favor? And that is unanimous. There's no one is opposed and the motion is carried. And then there is a second motion or second recommendation that comes with an accompanying motion with respect to a letter of request outlining some of the projects for which we seek cost sharing or participation by the foundation in covering the costs of the project as outlined, projects as outlined in the report. There anyone willing to make that motion, or are there questions members of council may have for Mr. McDonald? Yes, Councillor Bachman.
I'd be a lot more comfortable if almost if it will be three motions. It's three different projects there to my mind. So I think it should be three motions, not just one. The lot development plan, the Academy Foundation already has some money, I know, set aside to help towards that project. So I'm not sure if the funding amount is what is being anticipated or hoped for, but I know there is money set aside for that. So that is something that is on their radar and they plan to support. The other two, I would expect they're willing to support, but I think you'd have better success with having three separate motions rather than rolled in one.
Okay. Yes, Councillor Mosher.
I tend to agree with that because it's making some assumptions there that may not be, applicable when the time comes to, set the plan in motion.
So we certainly could break the projects down into three separate motions. That's the way council would like to proceed. Would you put forth a motion, please? Anyone? Yes, Councillor Bachman.
I'll put forth the motion to write the letter for support with the lot development plan.
Okay, right. Do request support of $100,000 of the $700,000, no, of $1 million project. Yes. Is there a seconder for that motion?
Just a question more than before we second it. Should we ask for more from the foundation?
I think that that there's a formula that's been vetted with all of the organizations before and with the funders, potential funders, and that's the amount that's been discussed. Perhaps Mr. McDonald can speak to that more fully. As Councillor Bachman suggested, this has been discussed before, and I'm pretty certain that's the amount that's already on the radar of the foundation. I think if there were an ask for more, there would be a lot of questions and concerns perhaps raised about the increased request. But yes, Councillor Mosher, and please jump in, Mr. McDonald.
Okay. And well, just one more thought on that, and then I mean, is this necessary before? Are those details necessary? I guess before we apply for funding.
I would defer to Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Your Worship. They are certainly aware of the $100,000 request. I talked to their staff with regards to trying to increase that. There is a possibility that they may be able to go up to 150, but they haven't gone to the board with regards to that as of yet. This is very preliminary currently. What I'm looking for is actually a letter of intent that they would help out the funding up to $100,000 so that we may apply for further government funding. And that will go a long way, especially with the motion of council maybe later on this year with regards to their contribution as well, so that we can show funding agencies our support for the project as well as the money that we're willing to put up for it. That goes a long way in these funding applications.
So it is preliminary ask. I also make comment on, I don't know that this would be a particularly good time to ask this volunteer organization for a greater share, since they certainly have been impacted severely in their fundraising efforts. They had started out very strongly with corporate and more local first attempt at a fundraising, a major capital fundraising campaign, which was very successful, but it's been brought to a screaming halt in the face of the pandemic. And so they really are not in a position to acquire more funds in these uncertain economic times. And so they're, trying to figure out how they do increase or generate more fundraising opportunities, and when it's a very sensitive time as far as charitable organizations are concerned. So I'm thinking this wouldn't be the time to be heavy-handed in our ask of them. So I think Councillor Risser had raised his hand earlier, and then the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, in light of that, I mean, the lot development plan really isn't a structural issue or anything urgent with the building. I'm wondering, would it be prudent maybe to consider deferring the plan overall?
And it's an important piece of the whole puzzle for functioning and so on, with parking and so on. But yeah, it's already been deferred to a couple of times. But I don't know if Mr. McDonald wants to comment further on that. You're certainly welcome to.
Thank you, Your Worship. Council did approve the budget this year with the 10-year capital projects. The lot development plan was in the 2022-23 fiscal year, proposally. To be honest, I think you could probably defer that for one more year, but these types of project, it is shovel ready. So we do have the specs and we have the specification, we have the drawings. if there is an opportunity to take advantage of any federal government programs, then I think we should jump on board and try to get it done before it possibly never gets done, if you know what I mean.
Deputy Mayor and then Councillor Bachman.
Your worship, I mean, we keep saying how uncertain these times are, and for us now to, potentially make a commitment of $200,000, within the next couple of years, I'd like to see it just deferred. I mean, it's not, as Matt pointed out, it's not a structural issue. It's not really a timing issue. Even if we just let it sit for another 6 or 7 months, we might have a much better idea whether we can afford even the 200,000. Even if the 700 would be available, we may not have the 200,000. So I'd like to see it deferred.
Councillor Bachman.
Just as some information at the last foundation meeting, this was discussed. The $100,000 is available, and they weren't thinking along the lines of it being a shovel-ready project, so that if the feds in the province were to ante up the money, that they do have the $100,000 on hand for their contribution for a shovel-ready project to make it go.
Councillor Mosier.
Yeah, it's good, all fine and good. I think the difference between the foundation and us is they have the $100,000 and we don't have the two, as Deputy Mayor points out. So we're going to the bank and borrowing our money, and they got theirs ready to write a check. So that's what makes it difficult at this point in time to kind of pull the trigger on this.
Councillor Risser.
Thank you, Worship. Arthur, I'm just wondering, are there any federal or provincial pots of money that are evaporating in the next 2 or 3 years, or are we just generally applying to stuff that's annual?
We're generally applying to stuff that comes up through, the federal government programs. Sometimes they institute new programs. I think through COVID-19, unfortunately, we'll see some decrease in funding, but also the advantage of doing projects that will regenerate the economy and get us back on track. So there's always two sides of that coin. That being said, it should be acknowledged that it was the exterior restoration of the actual physical building fell into several grant applications at the federal level that we could tap in. A landscaping plan for a lot development plan doesn't have the same advantage of the typical number of programs available to it. So it will be a struggle just to try to come up with the 700,000 that I'm proposing in this table, but I'm hoping that something will come up that we actually can tap into. I hope that addresses your comments.
So I'm lost again, so I'm going to have to keep a note. We don't make motions and discuss as we typically should. So I'm not sure if we made a motion. I know we had a mover. I don't know if we ever got a seconder because we jumped into discussion.
You did not, Your Worship.
Right. So there was a motion, but no seconder to move ahead with the first request. So is there a seconder or will we have the motion fall? Note, yes, Councillor Risser?
I'll second.
Okay. So I'm seconding the motion to move ahead with a request to the foundation to supply the $100,000 for the $1 million lot development plan for the Lunenburg Academy. And I would ask as well, this isn't necessarily binding in any way on town council. Would it be, Mr. McDonald, or am I remiss?
No, this would not bind council to these figures. only when we request an actual letter from council prior to the funding application will that be actually binding on council. And I don't see that happening until after the election, personally.
So this is more a letter to secure for our grant application purposes, the foundation's portion
The foundation.
of that project. Okay. Are there any further questions? All in favor of the motion? Opposed? Councillor Croft, I'm not sure, were you for or against, opposed? Oh. The motion's carried. Councillor Croft, I think, is opposed by lack of decision for sure on the motion, but it is carried. Thank you very much. There are then the two other projects that are listed with financial amounts tagged to them. And I assume this is for similar purposes, Mr. McDonald, for to clarify what the portions of responsibility might be if moving these projects ahead, or is it a little more, is it a little different with those?
Thank you, Your Worship. They're pretty much the same. Council doesn't have to make their commitments with regards to, like, for example, the handrail I see being done in conjunction with the lot development plan. So that can be held off until we actually go forward with the lot development plan. The sign itself, we're putting up a temporary sign currently so that there will be a sign on the building. It's recommended that we do replace that sign. It's not as in keeping as the sign that was there. So I'd like to put up a sign that's similar to the one that we took down. But by all means, I think we could just wait and make sure that we have the financial support from the foundation first, and then bring it back to council to see if they're willing to cost share on the sign or the handrail at a later date. But right now, we're just looking for a motion for staff to write the foundation to request their financial support for the sign and the handrail, as well as the lot development plan that was previously made in the previous motion.
Okay, so there, yes, Councillor Mosher. Sorry, you moved it?
I'll move that we write the letter, yes.
For both of those ones, or did you want to parcel them out?
Well, I think we already dealt with the lot plan, did we not?
Yes, yeah, just two
Yeah.
left. The handrail and the sign.
Yes, both at the same time, yes.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Risser, you're second for both? Okay. Thank you. Any further discussion on those? Questions of Mr. McDonald? No. All in favor then? Any opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you very much. So, thank you, Mr. McDonald. We are coming up on an hour. Perhaps we can deal with the next item and then look for a brief recess. So the Planning Advisory Committee 2020 citizen appointment, there was an application, just one application, but I must say I seldom read an application that oozed such enthusiasm and came from such a qualified candidate. So I was very pleased to read that and receive that, but we would have to make a motion to approve. So I look to members of council. Yes, Councillor Bachmann.
Is it appropriate to approve a resident of the municipality?
I think as per policy, I would look to Ms. Renton to clarify that it is in the absence of an application from a resident of an actual resident of the town, that we certainly can authorize a committee appointment from a resident of our neighboring municipality. But Ms. Renton, would you like to comment further or correct me if I'm wrong, please?
Better yet, I'll concur. You are correct, Your Worship.
Thank you.
Oh, great. Then I'll make the motion. Just wanted to make sure we weren't doing anything wrong. I think Jack would be a tremendous asset, young man with a ton of qualifications.
Okay, moved by Councillor Bachman, seconded by Councillor Risser. Any further discussion on this? No, all in favor of the appointment of Jack Strobridge to the Planning Advisory Committee? Unanimously approved and appointed, and congratulations to Jack, and welcome him to our extended team. And with that being said, and seeing that we are at 3 o'clock, partway through, I'd look for a recess until 3:15, and we will reconvene to conclude the rest of the business of our agenda.
Your Worship, if I may just ask before you consider that motion, would it be possible, if that motion is approved, to next move to the Board of Trade request? Because I'll contact Mr. Myra and ask that he join you at that time. He is working and was unable to join earlier, if that's all right. Thank you, Your Worship.
I would look for any dissent from members of council, but I think that's perfectly reasonable. So we would look to have that under the 7A1 as the next item after our recess, and look forward to discussing that then. Thank you very much for pointing that out, and we'll see everyone at 3:15. It is 3:15, so I will reconvene the meeting, call the meeting back to order. Just check that we have Ms. Renton is still with us and Ms. McCallum.
Hello.
Yes, hello, your worship. Just seeing if Mr. Meyer is able to join us. He might be one of the attendees, but
Right.
I'm not sure. I wonder, your worship, if you wouldn't mind if Heather would send Mr. Myra the website link and the cell phone number. That might be the most expedient way for him to join. Because he just texted me back and he said, how do I do that? So if you wouldn't mind, Heather, if that's possible to send him the
I
cell phone.
will do that right now. Thank you.
Thank you kindly. Thank you, your worship.
Thank you. And Councillor Mosier, you had a thought to share?
Yes, I'm unfortunately going to have to declare an interest with this next topic. Jenna is employed by the Fish Shack, and I think that caused me a bit of a conflict.
Okay. Duly noted that there's an interest being declared by Councillor Mosier in the discussion of that. And I'm wondering, is this going to take some time perhaps for Mr. Myra to join us? Because we may want to move on to another topic.
You may need to, yeah, he may not have anticipated the technical logistics.
Okay, I know he has used Zoom before, but it's not always a really quick jump on. So I think I will see him, Heather, will I not? Should he pop on? She's probably off.
He's walking down the parking lot right now, looking at his phone. So.
trying to figure it out. Okay, well maybe if with council's indulgence, we will defer to that topic whenever he's able to join us, and in the meantime, we'll just carry on with the order as it is. And so just since we're moving around a little bit anyway, maybe we'll just move to the Public Works, the bolded item prior to this one, or to the one that we thought we might be coming to ensure we allow adequate time for it, a discussion on it. So it is, and I believe Mr. Tillard is with us. So ask that we turn our attention to the additional wastewater treatment lift station pump repair budget and the staff report that accompanied that topic. And I will get that up, and perhaps Mr. Tillard, are you prepared to speak to that? Are you with us?
Yes, Your Worship. I'm just, I was just working on something else. I'm just calling that file back up.
Okay. Yes, we had put you on hold and now we're calling you to the table.
Yeah, I had the file.
Perhaps Ms. McCollum can share the screen if that's possible.
Yeah, just have to scroll through it here. Sorry, I had to reopen the file here.
Maybe if Heather could go to the chart, your worship, and upload that screen.
Page 2 or?
Page 2, correct, your worship.
Yes.
There we go.
So there's been a lot of work done and a lot left to be done, and making sure we have all of these lift stations working at ideal function. So have you able to get all of the information in front of you, Mr. Tillard?
Yes, I have. Yeah. So I'm not, Your Worship, I'm not sure what how much detail we want to go through with this, but basically this is a continuation of the process that was started in the I guess, the fall about when I arrived. You know, obviously with, and I think the biggest hit here, shall we say, compared to where we thought we would hope, I guess, hoped or thought we would end up is the two main pumps at the effluent pumps, both of which were in, I guess, far worse condition than we thought they were, both of which ended up being in the, you know, mid $20,000 repair costs. So those were kind of, that was a real sort of kicker. The rest of it is, you know, as assumption was made that we would be faced with doing the same thing on pump 2 as on pump 1 in each of the stations we had looked at. It turned out not to be the case in a couple of instances there. So hence the additional funding needed. There are 2 stations we have not looked at, and they're noted as Tannery Road and Young Street. Those are not the same manufacturer, and those are just submersible pumps. Right now, not indicating they're actually working well. Doesn't mean they're in great shape, but they're working well. And we need to get past the COVID issue with, so we must probably getting close to that to get those pumps, because it requires working at very close quarters to look at those 2 pumps.
Okay.
I guess the only, sorry, Your Worship, the only other issue was on Blue Nose Drive, where we had thought we had repaired a pump and it was working poorly and we couldn't quite figure it out, and thought maybe it was a discharge 3-way valve that connects the piping for the 2 pumps coming out of there. But as it turns out, it's the inlet piping. The people from Sansom had found some pinholes, I guess, in the piping coming on the suction side, which is actually good news for us, because it's more repairable. I wouldn't say it's any cheaper, but at least it's more repairable than having to get access to the 3-way control valve. So that's, they're looking at that now to figure out what exactly needs to be done. So we've just put a contingency in there to cover that additional cost as well.
Okay, thank you. Are there questions then of Mr. Tillard on this subject? And I don't know that I can see everyone all at once. Oh, there we go. I couldn't see you, Deputy Mayor, but I do now. So yes, go ahead.
Your Worship, like whenever these things happen, I think all we can really do is just make sure that there's been enough attention to justifying the costs. I mean, you know, I don't think we would be in a position to say, oh no, you can't do that, or, you know, that pump doesn't need fixing. And so it's unfortunate, because it's going to have an impact on us next year, I guess. Capital borrowing is the long-term financing, and so it's unfortunate, but I don't think we get any choice in this. You know, I think Mr. Taylor has done a good job of explaining it in the report, and so I would move the recommendation.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that motion to move the recommendation? Councillor Risser, thank you. Seconding. And that's to increase the capital budget for lift station capital repairs from 55 to 146,000 for 2021, with the financing to be previously committed 55,000 from gas tax reserves and 91,000 from a capital borrowing. Oh, thank you for showing that up. So further discussion now that there's a motion on the floor. Further questions? No, it explained very well then, apparently.
Your Worship, I just want to add, Your Worship, sorry, that we have got the sort of program instituted now, both internally and with the pump supplier, on regular visits. So the pump supplier is down there twice a year. We're in each station once a week for certain checks and once a month for more intensive checks. So the folks up at the wastewater treatment plant have got a whole program developed now with check sheets and whatnot. So doesn't mean we're never not going to have pump problems again, but we should most definitely see them coming well beforehand, and hopefully never be in this position again.
Yeah, very much appreciate the time and effort that's been put into preventative maintenance and the maintenance schedules. And I think those things are always prudent, and particularly with operating machinery that's functioning with providing a vital service, and which it's functioning every day. So that's extremely important, and it's reassuring to see that work being done, not just the capital work, but the planning to prevent further breakdown. So is any further questions then of Mr. Tillard? Any discussion? Are you ready for the question? All in favor? And that is unanimous vote. So the motion is carried, and the recommendation is accepted, and motion is approved. So thanks very much for your work on this. None of us are happy to be spending this money, but we know how important it is, and so it needs to be done. So good luck with the rest of it.
Thank you.
So do we have any more guests that have joined us in the meantime? I don't see anyone showing up on my screen. Mr. Myra.
Mr. Myers on as an attendee.
Okay.
So, oh, there he is. Heather's giving him speaking right.
Okay, still not showing up on mine. So I'll leave it to Heather, perhaps. Oh, there. Okay, I do see him now. So welcome, Mr. Myra. Thanks very much for joining us. And I think congratulations are in, yeah, I think congratulations are in order. There was some golf on the weekend, and I've heard through the grapevine you had very good results.
You're muted,
Still on
Jamie.
mute. It's usually on the bottom of the screen. There you go.
Now do you have me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, all good. Technology at its finest.
Yes. Good. So,
So, did
we do
you
have
want
your
me to, you guys all have the written copy, do you not, that we sent you?
yes, was in the agenda package.
Well. Hello?
We can hear you.
You keep freezing up.
Oh,
I'm trying to work off Wi-Fi on my phone because my desktop computer is too old, so bear with me.
okay.
Okay, so you have the letter from the Board of Trade, do you not?
Yes.
Okay, so the idea behind that is not to close down the street to put outdoor seating. It's basically for safety precautions, for lineups to get in, things of that nature. They just feel that takeout will become predominantly more important than eating in this year with the new rules. So they would like to have those parking spots, say from the front of ShipRite down to basically into the ice cream shop, blocked off from traffic.
Okay. I guess I had some questions around, and not necessarily for Mr. Myra, just from a transportation safety perspective about moving the accessible parking lots, parking space, and whether or not there was comment from our staff with respect to any concerns about this, and ability, I guess, to make it happen with barricades, or what measures might be taken. Is Mr. Tillard able to speak to that? Not sure if he's had a chance to review it.
Yes, Your Worship. I did review with the folks this morning, just a very brief discussion. I think we're thinking in terms of hard barriers. I'm not exactly sure what, but we do have some concrete hard barriers there. And our guys thought it would not be a, particularly big deal to make this a safe little corridor along there.
Okay, thank you for that. Any questions then of council? Yes, Councillor Risser.
Thank you. Question through you, Your Worship, to Mr. Myra. Just wondering why this particular area and nowhere else?
I guess that was the area with the most congestion. They felt under the 2.5 months or 3 months they'd be looking at this. I think they're primarily talking July, August, September. It seems to be the biggest restaurant with Shipwright and everything there. They just felt, when they came to us, that seemed to make sense to go from basically, I guess, at the Duke Street, just before Duke Street, and ahead to almost a Subway on the right-hand side, the water side. We felt that made sense. We certainly didn't feel we wanted to start requesting, parking spots all throughout town being taken away, but that was certainly a good area to start. And if it works really well, who knows, maybe some other areas might request that down the road. But at this point, that just seems to be the big area for congestion right now, garbage, everything, because that's basically where the majority of our restaurant business is.
Okay, thanks.
Deputy Mayor?
Your Worship, I wonder, it's a one-way street. I wonder if there would be enough room there to, extend the sidewalk maybe by 3 feet or something, and yet still keep the parking spots there. Again, being one way, there may be enough room to keep the spots, just build the sidewalk out. And I don't know how much effort that would be. And but to lose the spots, I think I would want to find out from Lisa what that does for us as far as parking revenue, because it's during those 3 months, at 9 spots at $2 an hour, the busiest time of the year. And we'd have to take that into account as well. But I don't know, I would think the street would be wide enough to sort of extend the sidewalk out and yet still keep the parking spots there.
I think their concern, if I may answer what they talked about, was the cost of putting those walkabouts, because when you extend the sidewalk, I think you got to do it with those walkabouts like they do in Halifax. And they just felt the cost of those would be quite significant. So that's why they were just asking. This was a cheap fix, but I understand where Deputy Mayor's coming from as well. So you guys have to consider all the different options. But like I said, it's nice to see. I will say it's really nice to see the handful of them down there on that stretch working together and putting this proposal in all together. If COVID's done nothing else, it certainly seemed to bring the community together during these times, and they seem to be working all for the same common goal. So whatever you guys decide, it's certainly going to be appreciated. I was just happy they didn't want to shut down the whole street and do outdoor seating this year, because I thought that might be a little more difficult to get put through. So.
Councillor Croft?
Thank you, Worship. Jamie, just for clarification, is this just for this summer only?
It's just for this summer. Yeah, it's with all the rules in place. People still have, some fear of going out and eating and everything else, that they still think takeout is going to be a lot busier than sit down and eat in. And also they're only allowed at 50% capacity. So that's where the number comes from. So like I drove down Sunday night around 6 and they were lined up to get into the Grand Banker. They were lined up to get on the deck of the Fish Shack, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what they're concerned about. If we do open that maritime bubble up and more people come here, that where are they going to line up with some of those? Because you have about 4 of them restaurants that their entrance is basically right on the sidewalk. At least the Grand Banker, you can go down those stairwell a bit and sort of be off the beaten track. But to get into the dockside, Savvy Sailor, Fish Shack, the ice cream shop, they're right next to, there's no place. You come out the door and you're on the street. So that's, or the sidewalks. That's what their concern was. But it's only for this year. And they realize that, and that's what they had asked for. It's basically, I'd say, till the end of September. They didn't really put dates on it per se, but it'll be for 3 months, like July, August, September, if council would be willing to do that.
Councillor Risser?
Thank you, Worship. I'd certainly be willing to move that motion. I just want to give staff an opportunity, if there's anything we should be cautious about before I do, to weigh in.
Thank you. Members of staff, or any concerns with respect to this granting of taking away the parking spots?
I'll defer to Mr. Tillard, your worship, but then comment after, if I may, please.
So, Mr. Tillard, any worries or concerns we should be mindful of?
Your worship, yeah, I was just, I don't think so in particular, and I was just checking with Peter about the widths, and I don't think it's possible to maintain parking spots there and travel path. And so we would probably, I'm not sure the width would be, but it would be, I guess, a couple of meters extra width along the sidewalk there, something like that. But our folks seem to think that will be fine.
And there is parking on the other side too, right? So
yeah.
So there is
Yeah,
parking
just
spots
the
on the
one
other
side
side
of
of the
street, we
street.
lose those
Yeah.
spots, yeah.
So,
And I would just, sorry, your worship.
go ahead.
No, I would just suggest clarifying if council were to approve this, that that's what it's for. It's to restrict parking. It's not that it's for, people to stand in the streets and use it as, overspill table and seating space. It's just to ensure that there's a safer area for people to congregate on the sidewalk to access. But it sounds like a very good idea, and my understanding is all staff are in support of this.
Okay, then with those provisos and assuming it's till the end of September, I'll move that motion.
Move to
grant the request.
grant the request. I'm just saying, how is it written? To remove 9 spots between King Street and Duke Street. And the 2 streets beyond the loading zone at the base of Duke Street. Do we need to clarify or be specific about the accessible parking spot at all? Is that something we can just leave to staff to confirm
I'm
or work
content to
out?
leave it to staff.
Okay. Is there a seconder then for that motion to approve the request? Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And yes, Councillor Croft?
Thank you, Worship. Through to Jamie, if we do this for these restaurants, what's the fear then through the Board of Trade that you might get other requests from other places coming up through the line?
Great question, and we haven't heard a word from anybody else in the business section or the restaurant section. I mean, the only place I could think of maybe would be Lincoln Street Foods on Lincoln Street, which would be the only other real restaurant, because Martine is involved in this proposal. So he's not going to request down by the Salt Shaker or Beach Bee. He's already made that clear. He was fine with this part. So it would be really Lincoln Street Foods that I'd be concerned about. And I don't think that area, myself personally, really gets the traffic flow for walking that area that we're talking about now does. So I don't think the Board of Trade would be in support of closing this parking spots down in any other location at this time, but we haven't heard from anybody, I'll put it that way. And I guess when this happens, we'll see what happens, but so far so good.
Yes, Deputy Mayor?
A few things. Through to Mr. Tillard first. Like, Ian, are we talking about like Jersey barriers, or are we talking about the orange and black, wooden barriers, or what are we talking about?
Yeah, Your Worship, I believe, Deputy Mayor, that they are concrete. So I think they're Jersey type barriers. I haven't laid my eyes on them, but what I heard this morning is we have concrete barriers of some kind.
I wonder if we couldn't invest a little bit in, a little bit of lumber and sort of make a sort of like a post and rail kind of effect along that section instead of the big concrete barriers. That's just something to think about.
Sure.
But also, I mean, there's probably 9 or 8 spots down on that street now that are being used permanently by trailers and stuff being parked there with nothing attached to them. Not to mention the construction companies. There's a couple of them that have at least 4 or 5 spots in that area, sort of just roped off. And I don't know whether we're charging them the daily amount as per policy, but if we just kept a little tighter control on how those spots are blocked off, this probably wouldn't have any effect on parking. I think it's a great idea. It's a good year to sort of sample what this is going to be like, because we expect the congestion to be somewhat less than normal. And but I am concerned about the people that park their trailers year round there, and you know, either don't pay for it or just take up parking spots. So I'd like staff to sort of look into what's going on down there, as well as doing this. So thank you.
All right.
Yeah, yes, Mr. Myra.
If I could add, like, if you wanted to put something a little nicer around there, like wooden, like the deputy mayor had suggested, I know we have capable staff that if they have the time could probably do something. If you'd give us a figure, the Board of Trade might be able to help out a little bit with that, since we are requesting this. So we might be able to help out with some of the material costs or whatever. We just don't have the skill available up on the hill to actually do the build itself, but we might be able to financially contribute to that. We're very happy with the way we're getting response from the town staff with everything we've approached them on lately. It's been a really good working arrangement we've had with B and the rest of the staff. So again, we're really appreciative of all this, and we're very appreciative that you actually heard this proposal with such short notice. So I thank you for that. But if you do need some financial assistance with some of the materials, if you decide to make something nicer, let us know. We might be able to help you out.
Jamie, how's your hammering skills?
Not a chance. You're not getting me to help. I might be able to find you some money, but I'm not swinging a hammer.
We want to improve the aesthetic, right?
Exactly.
So I think maybe dealing with the actual physical, the request of physically allowing the parking spaces to be closed off and for use by pedestrians and for lining up is sort of the main order of business for this motion. And then certainly if there's concern about the look of it, and I think we would you know, collaborate or bring back if we needed to a further request if it's not something that could be accommodated in with current situation. Yes, Councillor Croft.
Your worship, just wondering if B captured in the motion that this is just till the end of September.
Yes, your worship, I did. Yeah.
Is that a strong, is there a reason that there's a strong sentiment around that timing, I guess? I think from the board's perspective, it's that's when they only think they will probably need it for that length of time, I'm guessing. Mr. Myra?
Yeah, that just seemed to be the date everyone threw around, because like the latter part of September is usually when the fish shack shuts down, and you know, I think the ice cream shop shuts down around then. So we just think the area will be less congested at that time. But if we notice if this pandemic would loosen up even more so and people started traveling more and more in the fall because they couldn't travel in the summer, we might ask for it to be extended. But at this point, you know, we don't see that happening.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Risser?
Thank you, Worship. I'm happy to extend it till the end of October if needed, so that we don't have to discuss it again.
So I guess, yeah, so the current motion is indicated she's kind of targeted a September 30th cutoff, but we could either embed some flexibility in the motion or just leave it with the folks to come back to us if the Board of Trade, if they feel that it needs to be extended. So I look to other members of council for how they feel about it. Not. Yes, Deputy Mayor?
No, you know, Matt was suggesting that since he made the motion that, you know, that perhaps we would amend it to be the end of October. And as a seconder, I'm fine with that too. So, and then again, it doesn't have to come back to us, because October can be a pretty nice month here too.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So, so then that would be reflected in the motion on the floor for that we'd be discussing. So are we ready for the question? Would you like to vote on the motion? Ms. Rendon, do you want to, can you frame it up for us again, please? So we know.
I will do my darndest. Moved by, now I do believe, Your Worship, it was Councillor Risser. Have I got that correct? I was
Yes.
going to rely on my colleagues. Thank you. Seconded by Deputy Mayor McGee to approve the Lunenburg Board of Trade request for restricting parking on Montague Street until the end of, and again, we could revise this as needed, till the end of September, or October if needed, 2020, and changing the accessible parking space location as set out in the Board of Trade's request Schedule A, or whatever it will be, Your Worship. Is something like that acceptable?
For me,
Sure.
yes. Yeah.
Sounds great to me.
Yeah. Okay. So with that being stated for our review, all in favor? Opposed? Councillor Moshe, I'm sorry, but did you vote?
Well, if you recall, I declared an interest in
Oh,
this.
sorry. Sorry, you should have been disappeared, I think. But anyway.
Well, I can listen, can't I? I think it's not in camera.
I don't know how
I have to
you
go away. But,
yeah, I'm very sorry. Yes, I should have. You didn't participate in the discussion, so.
Right.
But
see, I'm unusually quiet, right?
yes, so I should have tweaked to that. But yes, it was noted earlier in the meeting, so that was so you should not have voted, and appreciate that you didn't. But the motion is carried. The request is granted, and thank you very much, Mr. Myra, for bringing that to us and taking the time today to discuss it with us.
Thank you very much, folks. And thanks again for getting us in so soon. And again, thank you to staff for being so cooperative these last couple of weeks, because there's been things thrown at them from every direction with this new COVID thing. So thank you very much. It's been a lot of fun working on the garbage police with B. It's been great. Thanks, and see you guys later.
All right. Thanks very much for all you do. And yes, reiteration of kudos to staff. They've had a lot to deal with at the best of times, but particularly in these times. So it's nice to hear those compliments from members of the community. So we have gotten through our bolded items. We have a little bit of time left. We have two other items left on our agenda, I believe. The bee population and climate crisis action initiatives and the staff report around that, and the Lunenburg Heritage Society transfer of the bandstand to the town of Lunenburg, and there's a resolution to approve for that. So
That would be helpful to approve, Your Worship, if time is in short supply.
yes, Deputy Mayor.
I don't think this is going to take a lot of time. I would move the resolution.
So moving, and Deputy Mayor's moving, Councillor Bachman seconding. I'm sorry, I've just lost it on my screen. So we are dealing with 8A and yes, the resolution is just a couple of short by Mr. Burke standards resolution with respect to the bandstand, and so that requires some signatures and on behalf of the town. And there we go. Thank you very much, Heather. Just to make official the transfer of that asset from the Heritage Society to the town of Lunenburg. So it's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? And all are in favor, so the motion is carried, the resolution is approved, and we will take good care of it, I hope. So there are a few minutes left, so we will go back, if we can, all of the jumping around to 6A 4, depopulation and climate crisis action initiatives. And there was a staff report provided for us with many points and a lovely chart. action items. Ms. Renton, you provided us with the report. Did you want to speak to it?
Yes, thanks, Your Worship. And very briefly, my appreciation to Heather as well, who helped compile some components of the chart that I think were helpful, pulling them from the strategic plan report. So on further reflection, when we looked at these two issues, was thinking that there is a connection. Both relate to our environment and many of the damages that are faced because of, in some cases, because of the use of pesticide, you know, gasoline and other fuel consumption and issues like that, many of which are matters that are relevant to the town and things that we have the ability to have positive influence on. So the report attempted to form a linkage between both the disappearance of bees, honeybees in particular, that the students spoke to you about, and as well the climate crisis action resolution that was put forward from or by the gentleman at the same meeting. And so reflecting on them further, thought that there might be a way in which to combine approaches where there was crossover. So the motion, if maybe we just go right to that, Your Worship, and the proposed draft recommendation. And granted, you may want to think about this further. These are fairly substantial in nature. You know, the outcomes if it's adopted. What the draft motion proposes is that council approves the pollinator action plan, aka, you know, the positive initiatives that we have done already, recognizing those and other things that we can do to help the bee population, and that would include many bird species as well, butterflies and other pollinators. And as well to potentially declare a climate crisis. Now, in the sample that was provided from the town of Mahone Bay, it sets out the requirement after having done such a climate crisis declaration or recognition that you would commission a report by staff and so on and so forth. I think you've done that, and then now what we need to do is to continue to implement those positive initiatives. So pleased to take any questions. It is 3:52 p.m. though, so I don't want to take too much time from your possible discussion of that item.
Thank you very much for the report and for that summary. So how do members of council wish to proceed or discuss these items of environmental significance? Yes, Councillor Croft.
Thanks, Your Worship. I think it's a great idea. I think those areas being proposed do need some cleanup. And I think areas along the grade, as long as we have somebody very close looking after them.
Can't hear him.
Sorry, we can't hear you now. No.
My speaker's not working, it says. Can you hear me?
Oh, that's better.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking that, yes, that would be a great idea to do that. And it's a great area to do it in. And the other thing would be the maintenance and the upkeep. And bee hotels require some work as well. So, and they have to put away in the wintertime and all kinds of stuff like that. So some thought has to be put into that.
So you're talking about the pollinator, sorry, the first part, the pollinator action plan. Is that what you're speaking of specifically, the items in that section? Okay, thank you. Any other comments on the proposal? Yes, Councillor Risser.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm happy to approve the pollinator action plan. I think they should be separate motions. I think they're a little different in order of magnitude, both for obviously the environment and ourselves. So, but I think we could probably dispose of the pollinator action plan today, and I'll be happy to move that.
Okay, move that council approve the pollinator action plan as detailed in the report, seconded by Councillor Croft. Any further discussion on that component? No, I too think it's a great idea. I think it would be, you know, something that's both beautiful and does good. So I see it as a very positive move for the town with, and it does require, as Councillor Croft pointed out, some maintenance and some thought, and you know, we'll need to you know, impose on staff again for those things, but I do think they come with you know, minimal effort for significant return from a community perspective.
And Your Worship, I forgot to mention that, of course, we would notify the students and their teacher in regards to this, whatever action, if you decided to adopt this, and the gentleman who put forward the climate crisis initiative. Thank you.
I think it would be wonderful for the students to be positively reinforced in their work as well, of course. So any further comments? Are we ready for the question? Okay, all in favor? And that is unanimous. We are all in favor. So we will adopt a pollinator action plan. Thank you very much for pointing out how we can do that, or detailing how we can do that. The second part of this report deals with the climate crisis and how we'd like to handle the request from a citizen that we make that declaration, I guess. We are doing a number of things already to address the concerns with regard to climate change. But it is, I was concerned, I guess I'll just throw out there about the zero emissions before 2050. I have no idea how realistic that is and what would have to be done to do that. So if that's kind of a criteria or prerequisite for making such a declaration, I would look for some clarification on what we're kind of trying to bind ourselves to. Councillor Risser?
Thank you, Worship. I tend to agree with you that, you know, I think to not declare a climate crisis would be silly at this point, but we'd be better off taking the time to figure out what that entails and how we can meet the obligations of declaring a climate crisis before we do so that we don't do so thoughtlessly or hollowly.
I just defer to or ask Councillor Risser to maybe weigh in on this too. It's certainly with environmental protection being, you know, one of the guiding principles of the comprehensive community plan. I'm wondering if the question could be sort of discussed as part of that broader plan, and is this something that would be significant, you know, to that end and as part of the plan?
Yeah, well, I think the plan certainly, the environment section of the plan deals foremost with climate mitigation and adaptation from the town's perspective. So I think it's well considered there. I think it's worth discussing that in that context, you know, as a policy recommendation or as something else. Yeah, I think that's the appropriate place for it.
Any other thoughts on addressing this one? Would council be comfortable just like, well, not just, but somehow offering this up as a question for consideration in the context of the comprehensive community plan and under the heading of environmental protection? That seemed like a reasonable deferral or referral for this information. So yes, got a couple of thumbs up on that, and I'd look to Ms. Renton if it is the will of council. How would we kind of make that happen? We just sort of hand them the information, or is there something more formal we should do with respect to that?
Certainly that would be acceptable, Your Worship, with a little bit more background information. I think the supporting information that the residents submitted and the context of today's meeting, I think would perhaps just to clarify for their consideration, and anything else that you like, by all means. Yep. Yeah.
Okay, it certainly fits in the time frame. And I don't, as I said, I'm not as well versed as I'd like to be as to emissions and how we get to zero carbon and the like. So if that's acceptable, then we would ask staff just to follow through and sharing that information, and we'll be discussing it again, no doubt, or seeing it again in the context of other items that are similar in nature with respect to environmental protection. So having dealt then, I believe, with that information, we've concluded the business for the agenda today. And you'll note in as item 9, the motion to recess and resume the meeting in camera on July 21st is intended to have a continuation of this meeting to give proper notice of in-camera meeting or in-camera discussions to be held at that time, which we would typically plan for. And that doesn't preclude the possibility of a special council meeting in the interim, because there is potential for that with some of the business that we are hoping to tend to potentially in the meantime. Councillor Risser?
So moved.
So moved to recess and resume as has been spelled out for us on our agenda. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Croft, thank you. All in favor? And so we are recessed and will resume on July 21st for an in-camera discussion. Thank you very much, everyone. Good timing.